समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा?
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There is a clear attempt at an India-Canada reset. But the big question is whether Carney can do more than Trudeau to crack down on what is, from an Indian perspective, the biggest provocation, the impunity with which Khalistani groups, anti-India groups operate on Canadian soil. Trade talks have resumed between New Delhi and Ottawa, but will they be overshadowed by the so-called unauthorized referendum being carried out by Khalistani groups with their shocking anti-India slogans and new threats, including invoking the Tejas crash at the Dubai Air Show? I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, we look at the latest state of play between India and Canada. There is clearly signs of a thaw. In fact, I would call it more than a thaw. It's a clear attempt at a reset. But how stable is this reset? Are we seeing really a renewed beginning, or is it going to be shadowed by the same issue as before? From an Indian perspective, it is the impunity with which Khalistani groups, extremists, terrorists are able to operate on Canadian soil that has always been a point of friction between both countries. We have now seen in the last few hours the Khalistanis claim a so-called referendum. There is also the clear and established link between Pakistan, the Pakistani deep state, and these Khalistani groups. And Gurpatwant Pannun, the lawyer for Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the so-called self-proclaimed spokesperson for these groups, has made a new set of threats against India, and several anti-India slogans, including Kill India chants and glorification of suicide bombers, have been heard at the referendum public events and referendum rallies. So the question is this: is this going to be different this time around, or are India and Canada going to hit rough weather again? Let me introduce three very experienced, very distinguished voices as we look at the India-Canada attempt at a reset. Joining me is veteran diplomat, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Always a pleasure, ma'am. Also joining us is Kushal Mehra, who has, I would say, a very unique perspective as somebody who spends his time between India and Canada and has been an outspoken voice on the issue of the threat from Khalistani groups. Good to see you, Kushal. And also joining us is a very special guest. Ms. Veena Najibullah is here in India. In fact, as that meeting between Modi and Carney took place, she is the Vice President of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Welcome to India and welcome to our program. Let me actually start by playing out a clip by India's ambassador to Canada, Dinesh Patnaik, appearing on the CBC network, asked to respond to this attempt by the Khalistani groups to hold this referendum. I start with this because it forms the backdrop of our debate around whether a reset is meaningful and possible. Let's take a look and then come back for opening comments.
See, it's a farcical referendum, which you can hold. I mean, for us, having peaceful protest or asking for something is part of a political process. Yes. We have no problem with it. In fact, in India, there are political parties which ask for the formation of a Khalistani government. And they're in parliament. Mm-hmm. They were in parliament. There are two people who are in parliament. One of them is the son of one of the persons who are accused or convicted of the assassination of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He is today a member of parliament. The same thing. You people know what referendums are. You've done referendums in the past. You know how farcical this is. Referendums have a certain process. This is referendum by Canadians done in Canada. Now, if you want to do it, you do it. The problem that happens only is that back home in India, they see it as Canadian interference, foreign interference in India. Like Canadians see anything as Indian interference Canada. Indians in India look at it as Canadian interference in India. And that's something Canada has to think about.
And that's something Canada has to think about, says Ambassador Dinesh Patnaik. Ambassador Mukherjee, before I bring in Ms. Najibullah's perspective, how do you see it? Do you see, of course, some things have improved. The fact that Ambassador Patnaik is in Canada speaking, the fact that Carney and Modi have met, by itself, all of these things point to an improvement. But the improvement is once again being shadowed by this question of how Khalistani extremist groups conduct themselves. There have been anti-India slogans, the desecration of the Indian flag. We have seen this play out before, and we have seen this play out before to the fundamental breakdown of the relationship. So what is your overview perspective, Ambassador Mukherjee?
Well, as a coincidence, Dinesh Patnaik was a very young officer who trained with me. And I remember meeting him just before he was leaving for Canada. And he showed me that there are death threats against him. And since he has an excellent sense of humor, he said that, the amount is very low. So I said that this is hardly something that you can laugh about. But he said that he has full faith in the Canadian government's ability to protect him. But it still shows a very gutsy approach. And what he has said is spot on. Referendums, when they are conducted in this manner in Canada, really don't matter to India, except that, as he correctly pointed out, most 99% Indians regard this as gross interference in India's internal affairs, which the Canadians would if, let's say, tomorrow we had a referendum in India with regard to the freedom of Quebec. We would say that, Quebec was a former French colony. People in Quebec have been there many times. They speak great French, and they look at English-speaking Canadians with great suspicion. So if we do a referendum here, let's say on Quebec, I wouldn't blame any Canadian for saying that India is interfering in Canada's internal affairs. So this is how it plays out. The problem here is that in a democracy, either Canada or India, there is a limit to which you can limit these kind of activities by a small marginalized group of people. It's not the referendum that is important, but it's the kind of death threats. Like earlier, if you remember, Barkha, under Trudeau, there was this disgusting scene of showing how Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated. Then I found that really, really revolting, frankly. Then now there are these death threats against our High Commissioner, against our Consul Generals, and then there is the whole issue of judicial impunity, which has been clearly established by the Canadian judicial process. Like who brought down our airliner is clearly known. That person is still moving around freely and is being protected by the Canadians. But there is one aspect which is very hopeful, which is that in my perspective, I think the new Canadian Prime Minister is much more mature than his predecessor. He sees Indo-Canadian bilateral ties through a different lens, also because he is not hamstrung for votes on that small minority group that was virtually holding his predecessor to ransom. Now, that is a hopeful sign. That would mean that he perhaps, hopefully, would be able to look at the entire gamut of the relationship and move it forward, particularly on trade, etc., where Canada, like India, have a problem with the President Trump. I call him President Tariff. Actually, that was a good slip on my part.
That's a good one. That's a good Freudian slip.
Absolutely. So his weaponization of tariffs has hit both Canada and India. A free trade agreement would help to move forward the business partnership, the mutual investment, etc. And frankly, apart from the Khalistani issue and this tiny majority who are spreading all this poison, there is really no other problem in the Indo-Canadian relationship. This is the only issue, and it needs to be urgently sorted out within the domestic limitations of the present Canadian Prime Minister, who has actually more freedom to operate on this matter than his predecessor did. So I would say that I am reasonably optimistic that things will improve, Barkha.
Yeah, and I think the operative part of your opening comments, Ambassador Mukherjee, was that other than the Khalistan question, there is no other problem between India and Canada. But the Khalistan question is not a small question. There is established research evidence to show the links between Pakistan and Khalistan. There are open threats. There is now even a course reference to the downing or the crash of the Tejas jet at the Dubai Air Show by Gurpatwan Pannu, who made absolutely a shocking remark and continues to operate with impunity and freedom. Veena Najibullah, if I may get your perspective now, how do you see it? How do you see things from Trudeau to Carney? How much has changed? How much is still thorny between the two nations?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to join the program. It's good to be in Delhi again. I think big picture, we are definitely seeing a momentum behind the reset. So the reset that began at the June meeting between our two prime ministers is gaining ground, is accelerating. I think the announcements on the restart or fresh negotiations on a comprehensive economic partnership agreement is a big development. I think even the trilateral that was announced between Canada and Australia is really positive because it focuses on issues such as technology and innovation, which are going to be really critical for economic prosperity of both of our countries. So I think the big picture, we really have come a long way. I was last in Delhi in February of this year, and things were really quite different. The tone was different. The level of sort of optimism, if you will, or lack thereof in the relationship was very noticeable. And now in the last couple of days, I'm definitely seeing that there is a change here, and there's certainly a change in Canada as well. Some of that has to do with the broader context. It was mentioned, President Trump and what's happening in the global economy. I think both Canada and India now are even more interested in diversification and building partnerships that are outside of both big economies, US and China. So there are contextual reasons for why we are coming together in the way that we are. But I think in general, there is a positive momentum in the relationship. And that's notable in what's happening at the level of our two prime ministers, but also the fact that there have been a number of ministerial visits as well, both from Canada to India, but also Minister Jaishankar was just recently in Canada for G7 meetings, and we hope to see more of that moving forward.
If I may ask you briefly, for India, the big concern is the Khalistan issue. Trudeau was seen to be somebody who was politically dependent on these groups and therefore could not shake off their stranglehold. Before I come to Kushal briefly, do you believe that the Carney administration will go further than Trudeau in addressing these concerns of India, which are very grave concerns because, as Ambassador Mukherjee said, it goes right back to the bombing of the Kanishka Air India plane, for which justice has never been delivered to the victims, up until now, when everybody from our former Prime Minister to our present Prime Minister continue to be spoken of in absolutely derogatory and often violent language, Ms. Najibullah.
Yeah, so I think there are security concerns on both sides. Obviously, from India's point of view, you've articulated them, and a number of other colleagues have done the same. In Canada's case, we also have security concerns. We call them foreign interference and transnational repression. There's obviously the famous case now of the Nijjar murder of 2 years ago. So those issues are important. There are sensitivities on both sides, and they have to be discussed through official channels, law enforcement channels. They shouldn't be addressed through political rhetoric or through social media. I think we do need to establish a step-by-step process to rebuild trust, to have channels of dialogue, and to be able to have the kind of relationship that is mature enough, that has depth to it, so that whenever there are challenges, we can actually address them rather than experience the kind of diplomatic crisis that we did. The reality is this is not also unique just to Canada-India relations. There are also these issues in Australia and the UK. Yes, I understand that in Canada, the scale has been larger and there's history of the Air Canada bombing and so forth. But nonetheless, there are other examples that we can draw on to be able to build a much more constructive, much more strategic, much more trusting relationship. That will take time. I'm not naive. I'm not saying that we can fix that with 6 months, but I think we're on the right track. And as long as those law enforcement discussions continue, and as long as we have political will on both sides to have the hard conversations, I think there's some promise in the relationship.
Okay, the Air India bombing, the Karishka bombing, not the Air Canada bombing, just to sort of correct that
Yes,
detail.
sorry,
But yes, no, I'm sure it was a slip of the tongue, but just to be sort of very specific.
I will
because
blame
this
it
is
on
very-
jet lag and lack of sleep.
No, I understand.
Yes.
I appreciate it when I'm correcting it for our audience, not to correct you. Kushal,
fair enough.
let me bring you in. Kushal. Do you feel things have changed? You have often said that when it comes to the Khalistani groups, you don't believe either political side in Canada is free from blame. How do you see things today?
Well, actually, I was one of the few people who had said when Carney becomes PM, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned this on your show too, that we are now in the phase of cautious optimism. Now, Canada is a is a unique country in that sense, where the Prime Minister drives a lot of what is the policy of the government. It's a very top-down sort of a country. I know people like to pretend that they're very bottom-up, they're very federal. I mean, at least I don't see any signs of it. I think CSIS suddenly removes Khalistan from its report when Trudeau wants them to remove it. Then suddenly Trudeau's gone, Carney comes back, and Khalistan is back. Khalistan is written in the CSIS report again, and these things are there. So, and I also, sometimes the Western world is like, you plebeians in India, you guys have these issues. We are above all this. No, everybody is like this. Trust me, I have this unique life where I live half of the time over there, half of the time over here. I'm like, we are so similar. All politicians are the same. So, so in that sense, but. As far as the relationship is concerned, you have to give credit where it's due. Prime Minister Carney deserves credit. He should be given credit where it's due. He was very clear. I mean, I've been in touch with multiple people on both sides of the government, and I clearly remember, I'm not going to take names, talking to someone when Carney had taken over, and he had said, I don't want to be near the yellow flags. Exact words. I'm giving you the exact quote. I don't want to be near the yellow flags. This was during the campaign trail. If you notice all the pictures of Prime Minister Carney, he's never near one. He's never. You'll see Pierre Poilievre near one. Pierre Poilievre was near Khalistani flags. You saw Trudeau. Trudeau, he would just drape himself in a Khalistan flag. I mean, after all, they called him as the Jathedar. And I'm not even making this up, because somebody in UK did call Justin Trudeau Jathedar Trudeau. As far as the relationship in its current phase is concerned, Barkha, I think in India, we need to realize that the Khalistanis are going to have referendums. We need to get used to the idea that they are going to have referendums. We need to start getting creative and start making memes of those referendums. Not get offended by them. This is what I do. Every time there is a Khalistani referendum, I look at some comical situation. The problem is that I'm not a serious journalist. I'm someone who's serious but does not take himself that seriously. I think we should have fun with this bit now, because they are sidelined now. And in Hindi, we have that kahawat, "O khisyani billi khamba noche." I think that's what is happening to the Khalistanis right now in Canada. They are crazy. Like, every time I write something, the first 10 replies below everything I write is Khalistanis. Like, they love me so much. So it's, it's a long-lasting relationship. I'm gonna have withdrawal symptoms if the Khalistanis are gone. So we have my critique.
But what do you mean India needs to get? Can I ask you, what do you mean India needs to get used to the referendum? What does that mean?
I mean, I think Canadians are bored. They need some time pass. I mean, what? Tell me, Canada is such a boring place. Otherwise, I mean, other than the time when the Blue Jays are playing, so the whole country is busy following the Blue Jays, or one thing or the other. It's a very peaceful country, yaar. It's a peaceful country. They don't do anything. हमारे इधर से थोड़ी ना entertainment होती है. So you have to understand, they are not going to tell these people you can't have referendums. That's just not the way it is done. Now, here's the thing what I don't like is the Canadian, that condescending tone the Canadians have. Oh, we are concerned about foreign interference. If you're going to talk foreign interference, then the rules of the game change. Because then I will ask the Canadian, what was the Brampton Municipal Corporation in 2019, 2021 doing, passing motions about a farm law in India? So foreign interference nahi hai. Yes, foreign interference hai. So it doesn't happen like that. So when they do it, it's, we are just doing commentary.
But they would, as you heard Miss Najibullah raise the point, they would, and here there's an interesting linkage between America and Canada. They'd bring up Nijjar. They'll say, how was Nijjar killed? There's a New York court where Pannun is fighting his case. Pannun was Nijjar's lawyer. My views on this. I believe these men are terrorists. They're terrorist sympathizers, and they have got, impunity to function in both Canada and, unfortunately, in America. But when Canada says this, what does India say?
Point number one, we need to stop doing a false equivalence between the genuine victims of the Air India bombing and a Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Hardeep Singh Nijjar belongs to the ideology that was responsible for the Air India bombing. It is a gross injustice, and it's an insult to the families of the Air India bombing. That's point number one. As far as Canada taking steps, well, how many extradition requests were sent for Talwinder Singh Parmar from India to Canada? 29. An ambassador can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 29 was the last number that the government of India formally sent to Canada. And they ignored every single one of them. There is a talk about transnational repression and Bishnoi gang in Canada. Guess what? India has sent extradition requests to Canada. कि भाई ये तो वापस भेज दे बिश्नोई गैंग के मेंबर, ये मेंबर है, यहां रहते हैं तेरे यहाँ पे. You know what the beauty of this entire thing is? Every bit of evidence that India gives to UK, India gives to America, India gives to Southeast Asian countries, India gives to the Gulf countries seems to be fine. But the Canadian justice system is so high and mighty that no Indian evidence is ever good enough. See, I have never understood this. What is good evidence as per Canada? Now, let's look at the recent case of the Ryan wedding thing. All right. I'm talking on behalf of Brittany Russell here. Not that she told me to, but Brittany was threatened. All right. By this guy who ran this portal called the Dirty News for some gangsters. This guy is also a Khalistani. Now, this guy openly threatens Brittany. Brittany calls the RCMP. You know what the RCMP does? In true Canadian style, just laughs it off. It's only till the Americans get serious and the Americans get involved in this that all of this happens. So, Barkha, you have to understand, this is what I mean, that we have to get used to this referendum bit and the violent rhetoric bit.
Okay, now the last bit before I think we must get Veena to respond, but on that last bit, the referendum, we heard Dinesh Patnaik, our envoy, there saying farcical. You want to do it, but India will see it as interference. Veena says that the Canadians have their own argument or counter argument to make to this. But how do we begin to look the other way from the absolutely vile rhetoric of a creature like Gurpatwant Pannun? And I'm just going to play this out. I hate platforming him, but again, it becomes necessary to sometimes give examples because you've got to see what's actually happening. And this is Pannun talking about the very tragic Tejas crash that took place at the Dubai Air Show that has seen the world come together to mourn this accident. This is what Pannun says about it. Take a look.
Just like their Indian fighter jets are crashing, the Indian economy is going to crash, and G20 nations do not invest in India. Khalistan referendum voting is in response to India's bombs and bullets. Just like their Indian fighter jets.
Okay, we heard it. You can mute it now. Just like their economy, their jets are crashing. Now, of course, this is absolute rubbish. But the reason I play it out, Ms. Najibullah, is that this guy, he's actually in the past threatened to bomb Air India planes. He's actually threatened to bomb civilian passenger planes, right? And I can understand that there may be a Canadian perspective and an Indian perspective, and we have to respect both of those perspectives. But it's very difficult for anybody in any country to respect somebody who makes open threats against civilian passenger planes. He's right now talking about the referendum, but he's also talking about the Indian fighter jet that crashed at the Dubai Air Show. And even invoking that. I mean, that is how coarse his language is. That is how open his threats have been. And he's a citizen, he operates both from the United States of America and Canada with ease and impunity. He was Nijjar's lawyer. What do we say to Indians when they see a clip like this? What do we say to the people of our country?
I can understand that this is upsetting, and it's clearly a topic that you care about deeply. But last I checked, Pannun is operating out of the US, and your relationship with the US is not defined by this single issue. So I guess the point that I would make is I appreciate that the issue of Khalistan and the issue of referendums and whatever is happening is something that you care about deeply, and maybe your audience does as well. But we can either spend the entire time speaking about that, or we can talk about the broader Canada-India relationship, which I think has promise, and we are going through a moment of tremendous development and momentum and optimism in that relationship. And we can speak about that, which I think most Canadians certainly care about. And I think most Indians, including Indo-Canadians, would care to know more about how can we actually build a relationship to the benefit economically and otherwise of our peoples and our businesses and so forth. The issue of Khalistan is a sensitive one. I think the point that you're making that Canadians need to better understand it is well taken. I think now we do have a government that's engaging much more with the Indian government on it, as you've heard from also your High Commissioner in Ottawa. But in terms of the issues with Pannun, I mean, that is a US case as well. But what I'd like to draw attention to is that it can't be the only issue. That's not the only issue you discuss with the US. And we would argue that with Canada, the relationship should not be reduced to this one issue.
I think that's actually a fair point, and I want to take that to Ambassador Mukherjee and then to Kushal. It is an important point that Pannun, doesn't define Indo-US relations. India and US have much bigger problems, also much bigger spaces of cooperation. And I think what you're hearing our Canadian guests say is that it has to be the same. Both countries will always have problem. Two countries will always have problem areas. Why not focus on what's working, especially when there's so little that's not working, and it's essentially only Khalistan. How do you respond to that? I think there's a fair question there that if Indo-US relations are not reduced to a single point issue of, let's say, there's Gurpatwan Pannu who operates with impunity there, who also managed to get a case in a New York court related to a so-called attempt to take him out, right? We don't reduce India and US to that. So why only bring this up in the Canadian context? How would you respond, Ambassador Mukherjee?
First of all, I would say, with due respect, that there is no comparison between the India-US strategic partnership and the Indo-Canadian relationship. The Indo-US strategic partnership is multifaceted. It's extremely important for both countries. And there are many, many strategic issues on which we have continued to cooperate even when tariffs have been weaponized against us. In this particular case, I would respectfully say that it's not possible to ignore it. First of all, because, as you rightly pointed out, Barkha, we have not got justice for the Kanishka air crash. It is not possible for us to just say that these referendums don't matter. High Commissioner Patnaik was right. They don't matter in the sense that this is a marginalized group of people operating from a foreign country miles away from India. They don't have any support in their home base, which is India, and they are in a complete minority. So it's a pity that the earlier Canadian Prime Minister, for domestic political reasons, gave them so much political space, which actually almost totally ruined the Indo-Canadian bilateral relationship, which is now on an upswing. But it's not possible to ignore it. Why? Because Indians, including you and I, Barkha, we see it as gross interference in our internal affairs. And we also point out to the Canadians privately that there are many embarrassing political issues that Canadians face. For instance, let's look at the treatment of the West towards their indigenous people. Let's look at the latest scandal which came out in Greenland of how these tribal women are still being forced to give up their newborn babies on the accusation that they can't bring them up according to Danish standards. If you dig deep, and I agree that Canada is a very boring country. I've been there many times because my sister is Canadian. And I find it so boring that I'm always happy to come back to India because it's chaotic and it's very entertaining in India. It's very stable and very boring in Canada. But given that it's boring and they need to have what we call in Hindi time pass, they can't do time pass at India's expense. It's not fair and it's not acceptable for an equitable relationship between two countries. Moreover, I would argue that it is relatively simple for the Canadian government to rein them in if they wish to. It's not enough to say that Pannun is now in US. We are handling it with the Americans. But there are many, many more there. And some of the murders that have taken place, as you rightly pointed out, Barkha, by the Lawrence Bishnoi gang for extortion or revenge. We've said bring them back and we'll try them here. And there has been no response at all, actually. And finally, I think that when the ties went down so much under Trudeau, uh, I think that there was a better understanding on the part of the Canadian politicians and people that this kind of total destruction of a dynamic bilateral relationship is deeply damaging to both countries. But Canadian
Yeah.
for complete security in India, we are not so sure about the security of our diplomats and our people there. Moreover, in in Vancouver, where you have the majority of these fundamentalist Khalistanis staying, the majority of the Indian diaspora are not with them, but they are being terrorized. As I'm sure our colleague from Canada would agree with me, that if they try to speak up for India, they get threatened and said, "You want to stay in Vancouver, you better behave yourself." And finally, Barkha, no person, whether Canadian or Indian, would take kindly to the desecration of the Indian flag, our tricolor. We can't ignore that. It's not possible. It would be equally offensive for the Canadians if we started desecrating their flag here in India. They have to understand that you can't have double standards in international relations. You are free to go into Pakistan and take out Osama bin Laden because international law is one way for you. That we guys are poor guys, brown guys, colonized guys. So the international law is different for us. We don't have the right to defend our core national interests because we are brown
Yeah.
people, colonized people. But the white people can do what they like because they've made the international law and they decide how to apply it to themselves and to others. That's not acceptable to me, Bhargav. It's not
So
acceptable to India.
no, I absolutely hear you and I feel every word you've said. But let me bring in Kushal. You started by saying let's give Carney credit, right? Things have improved. We've got to a point where at least that we are talking. There are envoys in either country. The trade talks have resumed. Obviously, something has changed. What is that something that's changed? We haven't spoken about that. What is that something that's changed, Kushal?
So there is a disproportionate influence of, and believe me, no Canadian will ever admit it openly. I am giving you the absolute version of what it is in Canada as far as India-Canada relations are concerned. Khalistanis have invested a lot of time and money on the Canadian body politic as far as the last 40 years are concerned, till the extent that, whether it's interns in offices of random members of parliament, small things like I write a letter and before anything, if I am writing a letter to a member of parliament about saying I'm deeply disturbed by this Khalistani element in my writing, and it gets leaked somehow to some member of some place, and then you get calls. It's okay. It's all part of life. The problem lies that the other side never responded. Once the other side responds, then the Khalistanis also back off. But the reason these guys, they have invested a lot of money, Barkha. You try and understand. I'm not going to take the name of the conservative member of parliament, matlab the constituent. He fought the election. The person lost eventually. That person raised 2 million approximately. You know, I was getting messages. It was very funny. I was getting messages. अरे भाई ये इतना कर रहा है, तुम्हारी community देखो क्या कर रही है. तुम्हारी as in non-Khalistani Indians. I was told, I'm saying it on the record. I am not making this up. I, as an influential Indo-Canadian, because I have the largest podcast over there, I was told, what are you guys doing? ये देखो ये इतना पैसा raise करता है. So these are actual facts. They have disproportionate influence. What changed is Carney came in and said, this money is chump change. भाई तू मेरे को दे रहा है, मेरा portfolio तो देख. I'm giving you the simple desi answer. This is the reality. Their money has no influence over Carney. So things have changed. Dusra, you have to thank Trump that he's fighting with Canada and let them fight. Until Trump and Canada are fighting. So Canada is like, bhai, you come here. We want to solve things with you. So these are some harsh realities we have to deal with. I repeat once again, my criticism of the Indian side is, why does Canada allow these things to happen? No, let India allow these things to happen in India. Go outside the Canadian embassy and do tamasha. Na? Who's stopping you? Who's stopping you in India to go outside the Canadian embassy and start doing all sorts of tamasha? Ask for Quebec referendum. वो अलग बात है कि इंडिया में किसी को क्वेबेक बोलने को भी नहीं आएगा, मगर क्या फर्क पड़ता है, टाइम पास तो होएगा ना. So, you know, we have to reciprocate. If Carney is nice, we are nice. If Khalistanis are weird, we are weird.
So what are you giving him credit for? What you opened by saying you've got to give Carney credit. What are you giving him credit for?
I think the national security establishment in Canada has been told to cooperate with the Indians. The evidence is there. You will see a few deportations and extraditions happening in the next 3 to 4 years from Canada. You will see it happen.
Okay.
And it will be under the pressure of the Trump administration in combination. Because, and to answer, you know, the bit where was said that Pannun is in America, but it doesn't stop India-America. Well, Pannun is not being sent back to India, but every other person in and around Pannun that is a Khalistani, including Bishnoi gang members, ma'am, are sent back to India when India demands it. That's the difference between India and America and India and Canada. Canada actively... Okay, Barkha, tell me, why is this Khalistan referendum happening? They want their face to be shown. What is going to happen after this referendum, Barkha? The first thing is going to go is they take photos like this with the Khalistani flag outside the referendum rally. Every single one of them goes. The ones who are not Canadian citizens, by the way. They go and say, and then there is a standard line. Sade naal takha hoya hai. Bharat di sarkar sade naal bada mada kaam kardi pai hai. And then they will apply for asylum status. Look at the jump in asylum applications in Canada in the last 2 years. You think Indians are so oppressed in India? All of us right now are sitting in India, only whining about the pollution.
But Kushal, both you and Ambassador Mukherjee, with no disrespect meant to our guest from Canada, said, oh, you know, Canada is this placid country. It gets boring. They allow for these things to happen. The fact is, we also have to talk about Indians who seek permanent residency in Canada. We have to talk about students who keep wanting to study in Canada. These are also issues. These are issues that then get mired in the Khalistan question, frankly, because it is the singular problem between India and Canada. You don't agree?
No, Barkha. First of all, Indian applications to Canada from our end have dropped by 90% in the last 2 years. The numbers are there. No, we cannot deny hard data. Indians are not going to Canada in those numbers. And from the Canadian end, also, they have started rejecting Indian international student applications. Just this year, I think the numbers have come down to less than like 80% or something.
Yeah, in August was the highest rejection rate in years for Indian students applying.
Barkha, you want to show your concern. Tell me, I am the only Indo-Canadian commentator who keeps talking about Indian girls being sexually trafficked in Canada. You know that. I've told you about it. I'm the only one who talks about it. The last number I came up with talking to organizations, including some folks in the consulate also, is around 4,000 Indian girls are victims of sexual trafficking in Canada, all because of this Khalistani immigration scam. So why do we want our girls and boys to go to Canada, Baba? मैं तो बोलता हूँ जाना ही बंद करा दो ना.
I am not making a case either way. I'm simply saying this is also a factor in the relationship that we need to talk about. Okay, I have to take last comments. I'll start with Ambassador Mukherjee and come to Kushal and give our guest from Canada the last word to be hospitable Indians. And let me get you, Ambassador Mukherjee, very quickly. What's working? What are the problem areas?
What is working? I agree that because of pressure from Trump, there is a determination on the Canadian side to come to a free trade agreement with us, or which will naturally drive the relationship forward. I completely agree that there has been a sharp decline in Indian students wanting to go to Canada, which, in my opinion, is an extremely welcome development. I would like to see zero Indian students going to Canada. I would like to see zero Indians immigrating to Canada. There is nothing in Canada which we don't have in India. We are much more comfortably off in India. There is no, and on top of that, there is rising racism across the West. We should start bringing up our children to believe that let's make India great again. Please don't leave your country. So I 100% agree with our colleague, in very brave Indo-Canadian colleague, and say that yes, we should not. But on the other hand, we did think at some point, Barkha, at the worst point of the relationship under Trudeau, we did think, let's organize some nasty demonstrations outside the Canadian High Commission. But what held us back is that India, a developing emerging country, has always respected international law and has fully protected foreign diplomats in India. So we've always felt that we can't lower ourselves to those low levels which the Canadians indulged in at the worst point of our ties, when we had to withdraw our High Commissioner because his life was in danger. Yes, Sanjay Verma's life was in danger. And for 48 hours, nobody knew where he was. We were trying to get him back safely home. So that was the worst point. And a lot of people said, ma'am, why don't we at least do something in front of the Canadian High Commission? Then I said, they used to say, the whites, that they are civilizing us. We are showing them who's more civilized. We are more civilized. We don't go down to these levels. We have our own ways of reciprocating. And so therefore, Barkha, I do believe that yes, they are on the upswing. Yes, we can and should ignore Khalistanis up to a point, but there are certain issues we can't ignore. One is justice for the Kanishka victims, justice for their families. Secondly, no desecration of the Indian flag, no threats to the head of our new High Commissioner to Canada and our Consul Generals will be tolerated by us. And fourth, let not the Canadians imagine in their patronizing way that their relationship matters more to us than United States. No. Even when Trump is at its worst, the India-US relationship is and will always remain far more important to India than the Indo-Canadian relationship. We can live without Canada. We can't live without United States. That's my assessment.
Okay, that's a big statement. Kushal, do you want to come in before I give Veena the last word? I mean, Ambassador Mukherjee basically said we can live without Canada, we can't live without the US. That could start a whole different program, but we're winding down. So Kushal.
Look, Canada is a fundamentally decent society. I repeat this as someone who stays there every year for 5 months, 5.5 months. It's a fundamentally decent society with decent people. And some people know that and have exploited it. I know Ambassador ne kaha ki we should not be doing those things. Well, I think there is no harm in doing those things. And every time a Canadian comes and tells us that why is this happening, we should have this game with the Canadians. We should cut, copy, paste every single response Canadian media personnel, Canadian think tank members and Canadian politicians give. I can give you Rosemary Barton's responses. I can give you Vassie Aleppo's responses. I can give you all that. I have a ready reckoner of Canadian responses. Like I always say, Canada's tagline is "We strongly condemn you." That is the country's tagline. वो सबकी कड़ी निंदा करते रहते हैं, कोई उनकी सुनता नहीं है. ये कड़वी सच्चाई है. So I think we have to reciprocate. If Canada wants to do trade, we will double the trade. If Canada wants to do a Khalistan referendum, we will give them a Quebec referendum. That's all we should do. The moment you do this, Canada will crack down on the Khalistanis, because that's the only solution for this. But I believe it does not mean Prime Minister Carney does not have his heart in the right place. We can have that thought process. After Prime Minister Harper, this is the second Prime Minister, in my opinion, in Canada that actually has used common sense and is trying to push through his own system. And that system is hostile to him on top of everyone else in India. So you have to give credit where it's due. Look at how CBC is interviewing and asking questions. How many questions did CBC ask about trade, and how many were about foreign interference and that transnational repression, Uga Buga, whatever they talk about?
Veena, let me give you the last word. I think you can get the sense of emotional emotion and passion that still continues to be felt very strongly in India, even though the worst hopefully is behind our two countries. Let me give you the last word. As you look ahead at the state of play, where do you see hope and where do you see the fault lines?
First of all, I have to say a couple of things based on the conversation that has taken place so far. This idea that Canada is somehow a boring place and that's why we need entertainment and we allow the Khalistani issue continues, that's complete nonsense. Most Canadians are proud to live in a peaceful, stable, clean, democratic society. We don't find it boring. We actually like being in an orderly place, which is governed by rule of law. And most Canadians don't care about the Khalistani issue. They know nothing about it. It's not mainstream. So therefore, it's not created for anybody's entertainment. On the issue of the fact that obviously US is a superpower and US is much more important to both Canada, India, and everybody else, of course, that's not the issue. The issue is that if does the relationship need to be defined by one issue or can there be more to it? I think we're at a moment where both countries are seeking to have a lot more engagement on issues that are beneficial to both. So be that technology, be that innovation, be that commerce, trade, research, all of those things that are beneficial both bilaterally, but also can be helpful as we try to stabilize the Indo-Pacific region, as well as try to build a new international order that has some elements of rules, whatever those rules will be, and both Canada and India will be at the table shaping those conversations. So I think we are at a moment that is much more optimistic than it has been 2 years ago. I think it's really useful for Canadians like myself to hear some of these other narratives that are clearly so mainstream here. So I appreciate the hour that I've spent with you and your other two guests, listening to those perspectives, but they are quite different from the narrative that we have in Canada. And that's not how we necessarily see the issues, but I think we do need to be in conversation. And right now, there are some positive conversations happening at the level of our governments. We need more of these kinds of exchanges on each other's media programming and personality and podcasts and so forth. So thank you for the invitation.
All right, we will leave it there. Obviously, we can all agree to hope for better times between our nations. And it's interesting that last point you made, Ms. Najibullah, that most Canadians don't know or even understand or care about the Khalistan issue. Kushal disagrees. I think there's a great degree of ignorance. This is my own editorial comment now. I think there's a great deal of ignorance, actually. Words like separatists, activists, are used interchangeably. People who, from an Indian perspective, are only terrorists who are basically waging war against India are often romanticized, in my opinion, in the Western media. So I think regular Canadians may not know anything about the context of, for example, even the Air India Kanishka bombing and how there are victims who are still awaiting justice. So I do think that just ignorance is one big part of the problem, but we will leave it there. Thank you so much to Veena Najibullah, to Kushal Mehra, to Ambassador Mukherjee. Pleasure as always. Thank you very much to our audience. See you tomorrow, everybody. Have a great evening.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.